Welcome to the High Rise Podcast, presented by Headset, the leading data and analytics company for the cannabis industry.
Welcome back to the High Rise, a laid-back, data-back conversation on all things cannabis, where we talk about U.S. MSOs, Canadian LPs, products, and market analysis through the lens of data. My name is Cy Scott with Headset. I am joined, as always, by Emily Paxia of Poseidon.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the High Rise.
And today we have a very special guest with Kim Rivers of Trulieve. Welcome, Kim.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, really exciting time to have you here. We just had a big update on quarterly earnings, and really excited to kind of walk through that with you today and talk all things Trulieve here. So why don't we start there? I know our listeners are very familiar with the Trulieve brand, but it's always great to hear kind of, CEOs describe their organization. So how would you describe Trulieve?
So Trulieve is a leading multi-state operator. We got our start in Florida. We built the company with a focus on achieving depth and scale in markets, which we proved out first, of course, with our home state of Florida, where we, for the last 5 years, have had leading market share, approximately 50% of the market share in our home state of Florida. And we have had to become masters at the full supply chain, as Florida is a forced vertical integration state. And so achieving scale for us in Florida, the way that looks today, is having well over 100 stores, over 2 million square feet of cultivation and production, and now over 700 SKUs throughout the market. After developing Florida to a point where we felt like we were ready to expand, and we had also the financial wherewithal to expand, we have since grown the company, whereas today we're in 11 states. We have industry-leading metrics, and of course both operating industry-leading metrics with 155 dispensaries, a large number of those outside of the state of Florida, 3.5 million square feet of cultivation and production, as well as close to 8,000 employees now across those markets. We have our cornerstone markets of Pennsylvania, Florida, and Arizona, where we are market leaders in those markets, and are really excited about our positioning for the future as we continue to execute on our hub strategy, which I'm sure we'll get into a little bit later on today.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great overview. So at this point, you guys have well over 150 dispensaries. Is that correct?
That's right. Yep, 155.
Amazing. And so getting a start in Florida, where you have over 100 dispensaries there at this point, is some of the strategy with Trulieve in Arizona and Pennsylvania, where you can kind of go as deep as you can like that, to have as many locations for patients?
Absolutely. I mean, one of our leading tenets at Trulieve is to provide true customer access. I think when we think back to when Trulieve was getting our start, which was back in 2015, this concept of being a multi-state operator was really just evolving in the U.S. And it was kind of interesting when I remember when we were going public, I was asked repeatedly, where's your map slide? Where's your map slide? Where's your addressable market slide, right? And it always seemed very kind of interesting and also silly to me that companies were going around and they would have, a couple of locations in a state like California, yet were claiming that they had the ability to service the entire state population. That's simply nonsensical, right, when we think about it. And, influenced really the conversation around the table at Trulieve to say, well, what if we really did focus on being able to truly service a market and truly provide best in breed in terms of customer service principles, product availability, product variety, and really bring some of those leading retail philosophies into cannabis. For example, we have a no questions asked return policy. We've had that since day one. This is a cash product and insurance doesn't cover it, right? So being able to really work with a customer so that they feel comfortable that they are making an investment that works for them with our products is just one example of kind of how the customer sees that philosophy in action. And so, yeah, we did start with a different approach, I think, than what was maybe the popular approach at that time. Similarly, in 2019, when folks were the land grab and kind of the race was on, right? We strategically sat around the table and had the conversation, and we said, okay, two things. Number one, we now have an opportunity with everyone else's focus kind of on greener pastures. We have an opportunity to really do what we said we were going to do and double down in Florida. We know that it's a market that we understand and that we can continue to scale rapidly, and that our invested dollar here goes further than really our invested dollar anywhere else. And two, we weren't ready as an organization, and that sometimes is a hard conversation to have, but it was true. We needed to really shore up our talent. We needed to shore up our bench. We needed to make sure we had the right systems in place in order for us to feel comfortable that we would be successful when we were ready, and when the time was right for us to really go in a meaningful way outside of our home markets. And so we spent a year and a half doing just that, right? And we were able to simultaneously solidify, I believe, our leadership position in the state of Florida, while also doing the things that I just outlined to prepare us for the acquisition that we just closed, which is Harvest Health. And we are in a significantly better position today, I believe, than we would have been had we had rushed to the party, if you will, back in 2019. So, I like to think that the partnership and the relationship between our management team and our board is one that's very transparent and very strategic. And like I said, I'm pretty excited about where we sit today as it relates to our future growth.
That's great. And one of the things we'll get into here is Q3 earnings. And I read in a lot of analyst commentary and just kind of looking at the numbers. Your margins are quite strong, kind of when you compare it to a lot of other MSOs out there. Do you think some of that has to do with that strategy, kind of really focusing on the business, like you're saying, and not maybe going too wide too fast, but going really like deep in a market, and then when you're ready, kind of expanding from there? Has that been helpful with that, or is it more of just a operations and structure and how you've set up the organization internally to keep those margins where they're at?
I think it's probably both, right? I think certainly, right, being disciplined in terms of really the focus on execution, holding ourselves to an extremely high standard as we grow and as we navigate growth. There are lots of lessons, and we could talk about that particular metric for a long time. There are a lot of things that go into that, obviously. Scale helps, certainly, and we know that, right? So you can become significantly more efficient as you build out scale. And that also, of course, informed, again, the strategy that we've deployed around these hubs, because in some markets, you're not able to get that scale because of regulatory restrictions. So how can we best address, or how can we best capture those efficiencies, even, kind of despite or regardless of what the regulatory constraints may look like in a particular market in the current landscape, knowing that will evolve and change over time. So, certainly I would say that for this quarter in particular, refocusing back to basics in terms of, strategically looking at product portfolio, strategically looking at our methodology, our pricing methodology, discount methodology, but staying true to that principle that we are customer focused, and it is important that our customers are still continuing to receive a value proposition for the products that they're using. And so there was a lot of conversation, just again, like nitty-gritty operations based execution conversation this last quarter, and I'm really proud of the team for the results, of course, as a whole, but particularly proud of the fact that we were able to kind of combat, I guess, which is funny to me anyway, and I've said this on earnings, the fact that I have to have a conversation around, gosh, your margins are 65% instead of 69%. That in and of itself is kind of interesting to me. But look, that's the position we're in, right? And I'd rather be known to have leadership, right, in metrics, and have to, have a conversation about how we're going to continue that, as opposed to, starting on the other end of the spectrum. But sometimes, I will say that in the markets, it doesn't necessarily, I don't know that they're completely rational right now in terms of how folks are looking at that.
Oh, man.
Definitely not rational.
Yeah. I had to laugh about that too when I heard that. I was like, oh yeah, it's 65%, like, sorry. But also with growth, that's the whole thing, is like, it's one thing to see gross margins like that in a stable business, but to see growth rates like what we're seeing in this industry, I feel like I'm taking crazy pills, especially today looking at the market, but
right.
We'll get there. That's why we view this as the opportunity to lean in, right?
That's right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's an interesting call out about the different markets have different dynamics, and I think that's great. You're so mindful of it, that the different frameworks, the legislative frameworks that we're dealing with in all these different states have different cause different challenges, right? So to kind of do that at scale across markets is not easy for anybody. So it's great that you guys are so mindful of that. Speaking of kind of the markets you're in, another aspect of the earnings that came up was some of the promotional price pressure that's being seen in markets like Florida. We certainly see products in Pennsylvania, percentage discount going up. I think on average discounts about 15%. That was in October of 2021 in markets like Pennsylvania, and continuing to climb. Where in maybe other markets it's not at that level. Do you have any sense of like what's driving that? Is it just maturity in these industries, just the competitive landscape? What's driving some of that promotion pressure?
Yeah, I mean, I think to your point, right, I do think that that's a market by market conversation to a certain extent. I mean, I think you have to overlay in all cases the macro environment and where we're at, now versus where we were, a year ago, where in COVID, right, there were a lot of things that were actually beneficial to the sector. Folks were at home, consumption time was increased, folks had more disposable income, right, share of wallet. I mean, I think there were a lot of factors at play there. We certainly saw a lot of additional experimentation or among form factors and some other interesting data points during that time period. I think that now the pendulum has swung a bit the other way in some respects. And I think that in certain markets, you're seeing, additional dynamics happening that coincide, right? That happen to coincide with the macroeconomic trends as well. And so I think Pennsylvania is such a market. Pennsylvania, and I've said this a couple of times, Pennsylvania started exceptionally, in my opinion, exceptionally high as it relates to pricing, really sort of beyond the realm of normal, if you will, as it relates to pricing. So I think that as we think about how that market will evolve over time, which is your question, I think that we're going to see a normalization. That happens in any case. It's just a matter of when. And so as supply has come online in Pennsylvania, categories have started to develop tiers, which again is a very normal and healthy thing, and we see that across most markets. And so you have a separation on a quality basis between lower quality, not value type products vis-a-vis your premium products. And so not unusual to think that a distillate-based vape should have some additional distance, right, between a resin cart or a rosin cart, as an example. And I think you're starting to see some separation occur there. I think that also, right, in Pennsylvania, more quality flower capacity is coming online, which will allow for more segmentation of market as well, and perhaps some overcrowding in some of the value type of products because pricing was significantly higher in those products before. So I think it's totally normal what's happening in Pennsylvania. I think for us, strategically in Pennsylvania, we have access to a significant number of affiliated retail locations now with the closing of Harvest. We were not required to close any of the facilities or divest any of the facilities there. And so, for us really in Pennsylvania, I think that's an opportunity for us to have additional branded product through branded retail, which again, as we focus on efficiencies and as we focus on what that looks like from a margin perspective, we think that does provide opportunity for us going into next year.
Interesting about kind of the price stratification, the different tiers of products with the Trulieve brand portfolio. You do have some products that you market in a way like to the connoisseur, the cultivar collection and Muse and others. Do you think, is that part of that strategy, or is Trulieve looking at introducing products at varying price points for the different audiences that may be in the market?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, so, again, through our experience in Florida, in Florida, we have to fill all buckets for all customers. And I mean, right. And that goes into, I think I said, over 700 SKUs that we've got capabilities. And by the way, we manufacture those at scale every day. So being able to take that product portfolio and then really have a deep data set around preferences and pricing and how those products resonate with customers is a key factor, right, as we think about what that product mix looks like in other markets. And so in Pennsylvania, for sure, we've already launched cultivar collection in Pennsylvania. Muse will be launching there soon. And so absolutely, our premium product, which has, of course, and this is no secret, premium products have better pricing durability vis-a-vis other segments. Not to say though that there isn't, some interesting wins that can occur in other market segments as well. But certainly we like to be more heavily positioned, and absolutely on the wholesale channel, more heavily positioned in a premium category. As we talk about branded product through branded retail, you have to have some variety there, right? And something available on your shelves for other, for a variety of customers. And we want to meet customers where they are. However, again, as we think about both the retail and the wholesale strategy in Pennsylvania, for sure you'll see. And I think, we've gotten some pretty favorable reviews so far, and are looking forward to, to growing that customer base, as I said, in the coming quarters.
That's great. And with these markets like Pennsylvania being so different than Florida, do you have at Trulieve like a preference on a legal model? Is there a state or region that you really like and you'd love to see that kind of adopted everywhere? Any sort of preferences on any of that?
I would love to sit here and it doesn't matter what I think to answer that question. I wish it did, but it doesn't, right? I mean, I think
True.
that our the opportunity is, right, and my job, our team's job, is to take the structure that we're given and to maximize the opportunity within said structure, right? And to make sure that we're setting up not only for near term, but also for longer term success, because the only thing constant in cannabis is change. And so we need to make sure that we're positioned with optionality as much as possible across the markets that we're in. For us, what that looks like is, it looks like, achieving the most, again, depth and scale that we can achieve in a given market, with relationships with customers that are sticky. I mean, one of the metrics that we really focus on at Trulieve is our brand loyalty, our customer loyalty and retention metric, which has been, I think, exceptionally strong and stable across markets and across the years that we've been a company. I mean, this past quarter was 79%, and that's on a combined basis across all of our markets that we're in. And so, it's how are we creating that, not just that one-time buy, but how are we creating that true repetitive customer in our markets? And if we're successful at doing that, then we can grow, right, as that market grows, and as the boundaries change, as the regulations change, because I think we've got a good handle on the supply chain, and we can always scale. Adding scale is something that we love to do. We're happy to at least, again, have that positioning, have that optionality, and then be in a position to be able to scale up quickly as we're able to.
Yeah. It's a great point that we kind of have to work with what we're given. Yeah, I guess there's some opportunity to maybe inform future markets, but you can only inform, right? Can't control. But to that point, in the markets that Trulieve does support, one of the interesting things that we talk about often on the show is like the varying strategies for the MSOs, and some MSOs seem to be set up, with a strong focus on the CPG or the wholesale side. Others, like Trulieve, might be very deep in certain markets and now expanding into new markets. And I thought the kind of the hub model with the Harvest acquisition, and talk about that, was pretty interesting. Could you give us a little more color on what that looks like and how you're thinking about Trulieve in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that, and I alluded to it a couple questions ago, as we think about the landscape today. And I think that, one of the interesting things about being, a CEO of an MSO at this point in time is that we're required to think in kind of 4D, right? We have to make sure that we're good stewards of our companies today, given the current landscape, and, while also, of course, positioning and having an eye for the future. And, even this past week and a half, right, we can see that the conversations around when that could speed up, slow down, move left, move right, that all happens very, very real time. And so it's always a good test, a strategic test, right? Is your strategy dynamic enough that it can pivot and shift and kind of absorb those changes? And so the hub model and the hub strategy really came out of those types of conversations within our strategic planning sessions. And really, it's pretty simple and straightforward. It's not anything that hasn't been deployed. I mean, I don't want to sit here and act like I that's unique to Trulieve or to even this industry. But it's really about centralizing operations in geographic regions so that we have the ability to take advantage of efficiencies near term while also being set up for more strategic distribution over a longer term, when federal changes occur. And so while we can't, it's true, obviously, we can't, export cannabis products across state lines, anything else is fair game. So, at Trulieve, as an example, we make our own nutrients. So we have, a nutrient program. We're able to do that and ship that effectively across the country. Packaging buys, talent is a huge one, and that's probably the biggest beneficiary currently of our hub model, and that we're able to organize teams centrally. And when we then onboard assets or expand into neighboring markets, right, we don't have to have a completely new overhead structure that we're putting into those markets. But you have to have, this is a very hands-on business. It's a very hands-on industry. You have to have boots on the ground. You have to have eyes in store and in operations. And so having the ability to move quickly and again have leadership teams centralized in those regions is something that is a key benefit as we continue to grow. So it's both near term, and then I would say longer term, as we think about distribution platforms, as we think about how we're thinking about our assets and our combined footprint. It's not necessarily just in a single state. It is on a regional basis, because there are certain things, right, that we're not going to have duplicative across every single state in the country ultimately. For us anyway, it makes a lot of sense, and we've been able to really get our arms around it, and it also sets us up for expansion, I would say, in a more comfortable way as we again think about those leadership teams and decision making across the country.
And where are those hubs currently based? Like, where are you thinking about geographically?
We'll have 5 in the U.S. ultimately, right? Southeast, Northeast, Central, Southwest, Northwest. Again, not rocket science here. And so currently, right, we have our cornerstone markets, as we call them, which is Florida for the Southeast, Pennsylvania for the Northeast, and Arizona for the Southwest. That's where, our teams are sitting today, and our largest operations and our footprint. And those are the largest contributors right now to our company from a top and bottom line perspective. And then, we're growing kind of out from there, which you can see happening, right? Certainly in the Northeast, there's a lot of activity happening in the Northeast today. Southeast, right, with Georgia, our win in Georgia. Obviously, we just opened West Virginia, which borders Pennsylvania. There's some debate on where you categorize that, but it is adjacent to Pennsylvania. So Northeast versus Southeast, et cetera. So that's where we are today.
That's great. And the Harvest acquisition, I guess they were based in Arizona. Is that correct?
That's right. Yep. So they're the market leader in Arizona, and so makes sense. And then also have operations in Nevada and Colorado and California.
I was curious, Kim, in terms of when you were making that acquisition, was there a market that you were most excited about getting more access to?
Yeah, certainly. The onboarding of our Southwest hub was a big deal for us, right? It's I think geographically it's always a little bit nerve-wracking when you're onboarding a market that is on the other side, literally, of the country from where you are. And so having a strong team, having a track record of being in that market. They were one of the original companies in Arizona. So they've operated in that market for a decade. Literally, they were the first company to successfully make a recreational sale when that market switched to rec in January. And we've obviously had a front row seat to their really repositioning of that company in recent history. And so philosophically, it made a ton of sense because they were deep in that market, like we were deep in Florida. So had a lot of similarities in that respect, and felt very comfortable again with having that team be part of Trulieve and really lead that hub for us as we make further investments in the Southwest. Pennsylvania also, though, I will say, was a close second. They had a great portfolio of affiliated assets in Pennsylvania. Knowing that we could come in and, put our Trulieve expertise from a supply chain and a scale perspective behind that group of assets is really exciting from an opportunity set basis.
Yeah, definitely. I was thinking the same too. Definitely wasn't thinking California. Such a tough market. God. Oh. I think that, people will benefit for having exposure in California, but we're all we're all myself included, but we're all navigating it at this time.
100%.
Yep.
Yeah. It's been a little tough out there for sure,
Yeah.
especially lately.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I mean, California, it's such a massive market, and at the same time, just fraught with so many challenges. And we've touched on this, on the podcast before, and changes that they're making and investments that they're making, and finally getting doors opened up in areas that are heavily populated, but just haven't had access to cannabis. And even that is unfortunately taking a bit longer than, we still expected. The provisional licenses issue, all of that stuff. So I see, if you're there fighting it out, you're fighting the good fight. And I think there's going to be some real winners that come out of it. But I can also see on the other side, it's like you kind of wait for the dust to settle a little bit and kind of understand what that market's really going to look like. Because it's still so many years into it. I feel like it still hasn't figured itself out yet. And so some time to do
Well,
that.
I think that it's just, there's been so many dramatic shifts, right? I mean, at least, there are way better people to talk about California than me, but at least for what it's worth, my perspective is that, right, it started on one end of the spectrum, and then it tried to overcorrect to the other end of the spectrum, and then it's swinging back. And so whenever you have those like dramatic swings coupled with heavy local regulatory issues that you have to navigate, that becomes, particularly difficult to predict. I mean, forget about, right? I mean, when we talk about using predictive analytics, and we talk about, when you have such a vast shifting landscape, that's what makes, and that's for any business, right? I mean, forget about cannabis. I mean, when you talk about just a regulated business, when you have changes that are happening, I mean, and you can't build the business based on something that's, kind of what we can expect one year to another, it's challenging in any industry. But particularly, obviously, in this one, when you have all the other challenges on top of it, from a taxation and other things that we love to talk about.
Speaking of, I guess, changes, some of the big news last couple of weeks, I mean, it's been all year, but recently with the States Reform Act introduction, how are you thinking about that? It seems to be kind of fits and starts with the federal change. You mentioned earlier, speed up, slow down, having to think in four dimensions because you have this external dynamic of, maybe there is some change here. So what do you think this means for the industry with something like a States Reform Act coming, kind of being taken, sounds pretty seriously from the Republican Party here? Does that impact an organization like Trulieve? Would that be helpful for a company? I mean, obviously, you guys are performing very well in the current landscape, and I think you will continue to do so. But does having some federal legislation help accelerate things in any way?
Look, any policy measure, I'll take anything at the federal level. So I'm not picky, really. I mean, whatever you want to give me, I'm be happy and say thank you. And I mean, and I think that, right. I mean, that's sort of similar, right, to the answer before on the states side of things. I think that, again, while we love to have and are certainly involved in conversations around, federal policy, at the end of the day, right, it's our responsibility as an organization to be poised to be able to move and pivot and, accelerate when it's time to do that, when we have the actual clear sight or line of sight as to what is going to come down. I mean, I think that it is encouraging for sure, and it is a positive for sure that Congresswoman Mace filed a substantive bill that obviously she and others had put a lot of time and effort and energy behind, and it was thoughtful and rational. And so, I mean, absolutely, as an industry, we should always applaud those efforts, regardless of if it's perfect or if there are things that we would like to see changed or what have you. I mean, just the fact that someone used their position to advance cannabis as a policy reform measure, I think in and of itself is a wonderful thing. I think in terms of what I think the repercussions or results of that are, remains to be seen. Right? There are unfortunately, a lot of party politics at play. Nothing new for regulated industry. Again, cannabis aside, right? Which I think sometimes we forget about, but it's nothing new. I think that we're all, myself included, remain hopeful that something happens prior to the midterms. I think it would be disappointing, right, for folks if this opportunity slips by. particularly if there is a significant shift in makeup, right, on a go forward basis. I think I've been asked the question a number of times, like, well, is it surprising that it's a Republican? Absolutely not. We look at in southern states, and, Florida is a perfect example, where cannabis legislation is more and more common, right? And it's advancing in very, Republican dominated states. It's not, and I've said this for a long time, I don't think it's a red or a blue issue anymore. I think it might have used to have been, right? But not anymore. And it's really a human issue, and all it takes is even if it's a CBD law getting passed, and then folks having loved ones or, friends or what have you that are positively affected, and they realize two things. One, the sky didn't fall, right? And two, that this is actually can change people's lives. And I think then it does, I mean that very literally, that it becomes a human issue very quickly. And so it's frustrating when you know that conceptually, right, we have folks in DC that seem to understand that part of it, right? So I think the positive news here is that I think we all have been, in the kudos to the advocacy community, quite frankly, because I know that, really ground up and grassroots advocacy in many states are the reason, I say this all the time, they're the reason that I'm here, they're the reason that we get to do this, I think in large part. So kudos there, because I think we've gotten past the idea that this is a good thing or a bad thing, right? I mean, I think now we're in the nitty-gritty sausage making of whose idea is going to make it through and who can take credit. I mean, and if you think about that at a macro level, that's what I get excited about. I'm like, oh my God, we're at the point of like, who's going to take credit, and is this enough? Like, I mean, geez, like think about that 2 years ago, right? We would have never thought that that's where we would be. And so if we just kind of think about that, and we think about where we came from, we were all worried we were going to get raided by the feds, right? To yes. Where we are now, that it's who's going to take the baton and get the gold star for cannabis policy reform. That's a pretty big shift in 24 months.
Yeah. And I think when you look at like what we've all built and what you've built, for example, very tangibly, very clear example of what can be built without banking reform, without reform at the federal level. So this is all happening in spite of that. So I hope people can just remember it. I mean, it will be disappointing just from a sentiment standpoint, and also just like, come on, let's just keep moving forward. I was thinking about it, like you have to do these quarterly earnings calls, right? And your investors are your voters and they hold you accountable, right? But if politicians had to do a quarterly earnings call, man, I think they would be doing things a little bit differently. It's like facing the news, right? Every time. So I don't know. Transparency and accountability would be something that I think they should be talking to their investors or their voters, is, we really are the constituents who put them in, well, I don't know who I put in power at this point, but I don't feel that represented in government. But anyway.
I like that idea, though. Get them to do quarterly earnings calls.
Let's give
basically.
them feedback. Let's get Andrew Carter on the line, grilling him. See how that goes. But it's just one of those things that I can't help but think. And then, we've been talking about it a lot today at the office, like the U.S. just top-ticked the world in this opiate crisis. And to Kim's point, we have a net positive effect in legalizing and regulating cannabis. And one of those net positive effects is that we see a decline in opiate consumption in markets where we have legal cannabis programs. And it's something that we need to be taking care of our veterans better and having opportunities for them to have access for their PTSD. Canada did probably a better job of that right out the gate than we did as a country on that. And I think we really need to think about this, considering that statistic was so abhorrent and upsetting yesterday. And I don't know, if the politicians can't get moving based on that, I don't know where we go from here. But we'll keep pushing. We'll keep building businesses. So.
Yeah. Speaking of politicians, I mean, I mentioned the midterm elections, coming up here in 2022. What do you think we'll be talking about next year? Any predictions on what's going to be, the big conversation piece?
Yeah, we're going to be talking about Emily and her team, right? And their ETF that they just launched, and how they're like the top performing ETF in the universe. That's what we're going to be talking about. I mean, is there anything else, really? I mean,
I think we're going to see Trulieve uplisted. That's going to happen.
Yeah, that would be, I mean, we're, obviously we're ready. We've been preparing. I know there's a few of us who have been. So, because right now we have all of the fun, right? Our SOX preparedness year and all of those fun things without actually the benefit.
Yes.
So it would be great for us to actually be able to uplist. But yeah, I think that, I think next year we're going to be talking about, the additional state catalysts that are on the horizon, right? And I think to Emily's point, right, we're building these businesses. We're not dependent on federal reform, and we're building these businesses in a way, and Trulieve certainly in a way that we are, again, financially independent of, and try to be financially independent of external factors by having great discipline to both top and bottom line, so that we can continue to grow our businesses and again position ahead of state change, sort of regardless of what's happening externally, and continuing to see more and more Americans take their health into their own hands by using cannabis as their wellness product of choice. And I think that the more that happens, right, the more the federal conversation will happen, right? And I think that's the other point. It gets to a point where it's just nonsensical. And so, we're head down. It's going to be an execution story over the next year, as it has been. But I think that is actually amping up as things come into focus, and as more states come online, and these opportunities present themselves. And so, like I said, it's a really exciting time to be in my role and to be doing what I do. And it's the whole mantra, right? It's the onward. So it's like, let's go.
Love it. So 2022, more success. Poseidon's ETF is off the charts success,
World
and we see
domination,
world
yep.
domination, and we see Trulieve get uplisted. I love it. I'd take those odds. Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Kim, for joining us today. Really insightful, and always so great to hear from the operators directly as we kind of look from the outside in. So really appreciate your insight and spending the time with us today, and hopefully we can do it again in the future soon.
Yeah, this was great. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, anytime. Thanks, guys.
Thanks so much. And if you're enjoying the podcast, be sure to subscribe in your favorite podcast app and rate us. It always helps the show. We'll see you all next time.
Thanks for listening to the High Rise Podcast, presented by Headset. For more information on Headset, visit headset.io.